Hey guys, it's Bailey. Welcome back to the channel and thanks so much for tuning in. Today I'm going to be diving into some new products from Rimmel. I was at the drugstore recently and they had a lot of what's new displays. You know those where it's like it's not mixed in with the permanent stuff. It's like the shiny new end cap or merchandise with cardboard packaging. Lots of that at I forget if it's CVS or Walgreens, but a drugstore. And I've been testing it over the past few days and want to give you my thoughts. We have everything from foundation, concealer, new eyeshadow, setting powder, lots of new stuff. I'm wearing it all today and I'm gonna have a lot of demos and swatches for you as well. So let's go ahead and dive in. First, let's start with the face products. They have come out with a new formula, the Lasting Finish 24-Hour Breathable formula in both foundation and concealer. Let's start with the foundation first. So mine is in the shade 203 True Beige and it comes with something similar to that Clinique foundation. I don't have it, I haven't used it, but it's one of the first foundations I think that was notorious for having the biggest doe foot applicator in the world. So that's the applicator you get with this thing, and I don't hate it. I'm not crazy about the fact that I put this directly on my face and then I put it back into the product. I think it's going to shorten the lifetime of the product as opposed to something like an airtight pump where you don't have to worry about that exposure. But it's not the worst thing to happen, certainly not the worst thing to come from Rimmel. It used to be you would just get the bottle and the top and then you'd have to, like a ketchup bottle, just like smash it against the back of your hand to try and get it out. So the doe foot is much preferred over that, but still not my favorite. In terms of a shade match, when it first goes on, I feel like it looks really warm, a little orange for my skin tone, but once it gets blended in and it gets mixed with all the other products that I wear, bronzer, highlighter, blush, all that kind of stuff, I feel like it's a much better match for my skin tone. Plus my face is naturally lighter than the rest of my body because I tend to be much better about keeping it protected when I'm in the sun. So when all is said and done, I would say the shade match is pretty okay, but maybe a tad warm. The formula on the back here, it says shake before use, lightweight skin perfecting foundation with medium coverage. Breathable skin technology that moisturizes for up to 24 hours. It also has broad spectrum SPF of 20 in here. In terms of the finish and the coverage, I would totally say it's a medium coverage. I found myself really layering this up thinking that it was going to be a full coverage, but it is not. It is a true medium in that you will find any sort of blemishes or scarring you have from blemishes, discoloration from those. They will definitely shine through. There is no really layering it up to completely conceal or hide them. You have to go in with another concealer over top. So if you are really looking for a lighter coverage, you don't need to go full on foundation, then this would be a good option for you. I honestly used to prefer more of a full coverage look, but I'm finding that the more I do that and then I go on and I pile concealer that adds coverage and I apply a setting powder, even if it's translucent, it just adds an extra looking layer to my skin, and then the other blush, bronzer, yada yada, I end up with more coverage than I anticipate. And sometimes when I'm using a full coverage foundation, it's certainly more than I bargained for. So I feel like, you know, a couple years ago, maybe even a couple months ago, when I was really feeling full coverage foundations, this would not have been my cup of tea. But I gotta be honest, and so maybe a couple years, even a couple months ago, this would not have been my cup of tea because I was all about the full coverage foundation. But I have to say, I actually kind of like the way this lays on the skin with its medium coverage, which could also be due in part to using it in conjunction with the concealer, which I'll get to shortly. In terms of a finish, it doesn't really say whether it's matte, satin, dewy, whatever the case may be. I find it's more of a solid satin finish. It's not completely dry down matte unless you put a finishing powder over top, but certainly where it's just the foundation showing through, which tends to be this area, because I will set my under eye area. I'll also apply concealer, which will affect how it wears, but my true indicator tends to be like my cheek area because I don't set that with powder. I rarely apply additional products over top of that space, so that tends to be my indicator for how truly a foundation will wear on my skin. And to me, it is a true satin. It will develop some excess oil, so it's not going to stay completely matte, but it's also not going to look too thick and cakey when you layer it up, which is nice. And in that way, I guess it really is kind of that lives up to the breathable claim. Otherwise, I don't honestly know what they mean by breathable, other than the fact that it might be just light and airy feeling on the skin. I've been tending to like a little bit of dewiness to my foundation, which is why I've been loving the Sunday Riley, the Influencer foundation. So I don't think this will be my go-to on an everyday basis, because even though I don't mind the coverage, I do like a little bit more of a healthy glow to my skin, even though this says it moisturizes. That was something I wanted to talk about. So it says breathable skin technology that moisturizes for up to 25 hours. So in addition to lasting, the coverage lasting 25 hours, it says it's gonna hydrate. Because of that, that, I kind of expected more of a dewier finish. I don't feel like my skin is any more hydrated at the end of 25 hours than it was beforehand, and I certainly will still use a moisturizer underneath because, you know, while it's not dry, it doesn't have a matte finish. Like I said, it doesn't moisturize for me. So for dry skin types hoping that this will contribute more moisture to their skin, I don't know that I would count on that. Overall for that, like I said, it's not going to be an everyday must-have foundation for me, but in terms of drugstore foundations that I could see myself using long-term, depending on the coverage I want, the finish I want, I could see reaching for this more frequently. I think the only other thing I want to mention with this, which a lot of you are probably aware of, especially if you're familiar with Rimmel products, is the fragrance. It has a pretty strong fragrance to it. Not bad, smells kind of soapy, kind of floral, kind of hard to put my finger on, but the point is that it's definitely there. It's pretty strong when you go in and apply it, and so to the extent that's not your thing, you're sensitive, either your nose is sensitive to it or your skin is sensitive to fragrance, that's going to be something you want to avoid. Now onto the concealer. Like the foundation, it's part of the Lasting Finish 25-hour Breathable line. Mine is in the shade 200 Light, and it says it has lightweight medium coverage. The shade match, I think it's a good shade match for me, especially if I want to do that dual concealer highlight thing. I do have a couple concealers that I use where it matches my skin tone, and so it's really more of a coverage play there, but this shade, Light, for me, if I do that whole the Kardashian triangle, that thing, it will act as a little bit more of a highlighter because it is probably a full shade deeper than my skin tone, or at least the shade of this foundation, which is, the applicator here is a sponge tip, but unlike, what is it, the Maybelline Age Rewind that has the big poofy ball at the end, this is more of a firm sponge. Think like drugstore beauty blender, but it's the cheaper version that doesn't really get as soft as you'd like when it's wet, and obviously it absorbs a lot of product here. Ultimately, it doesn't help blend your concealer. Like, I'll apply this directly to my face, and even if I go back and forth trying to blend it, or patting it like I might a beauty blender, nothing gets the job done quite as well as a brush, or honestly, my fingers are what I use just because I like the heat of my hands to help melt that into my skin. So this is kind of useless for me, this applicator. I really wish they would have just given like a normal dispenser so you could put it on your finger and then apply it directly. To me, this is more of a germ reservoir, kind of like the doe foot in the foundation. Not the worst, but not the best. But the way it dries down, it like does it in a way that feels very secure and it's going to last throughout the day, but not in a way that, but the reason why I keep this around is the formula. I love the way this sets in my under eye area. It dries down to this powdery finish, but without feeling too drying in my under eye. And what I feel like is interesting is that this does not mention the moisture aspect that the foundation did. That this is long-lasting, breathable concealer with medium coverage, helps conceal imperfections, cushion applicator allows for perfect blendability. No, it doesn't. And touch-ups on the go. But nowhere in there does it mention the moisture like the foundation does. And so something to know is that you can expect even less moisture out of this. I don't personally find that bothers me, even though I do have fine lines starting to develop here in my outer corner. You know, the kind like from the smile, it's not quite crow's feet out here. It's just like, you know, from smiling and the natural creasing you get here in your under eye. But I don't find that this dries so powdery and thick that it sinks into those or emphasizes them in any way. It just dries down to where you know it's solid and it's going to last throughout the day. And it does last throughout the day, whether I'm wearing it alone or whether I'm setting it with the powder I'm about to talk about. This is a beautiful formula for me and I love it. But again, not for people who are going to want a more full coverage concealer, because that it is not, but it is nice for a light medium coverage that adds that brightening component if you get the right shade for you. Speaking of the powder, this is the Insta Fix and Matte Translucent Powder, and this is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's a setting powder, looks white in the pan, so I did do a flash test to see if it would give crazy flashback, and I didn't notice anything beyond subtle brightening in my under eye area, which is where I really tend to focus this guy on. So you don't need to worry about that. It's a really, really fine formula, like unlike a lot of pressed pan setting powders where it can seem excessively dry and it takes a whole lot of swirling with the brush in there to get anything to come off. This actually provides a lot of payoff. I noticed some slight blurring of features when I apply this in my under eye area without caking, which is good. But throughout the day, I do notice that this particular combination of powder and concealer can get a little bit heavy looking sometimes if I've overdone it with the concealer or the powder, really either one. So do be aware of that. Like, don't, and I kind of attribute it to wanting more coverage and not realizing or remembering that this is a medium coverage, and so if I want full coverage, the answer is not to layer, it's to reach for something else. So just something to keep in mind. If you overdo it, you will notice that cakiness, but if you just put like, you know, an average amount of product on your face, you don't try and layer and layer and layer it up, you're not going to get that cakiness, and you're going to get a little bit of some blurring action from this powder too, so that is nice. Now let's talk about a dual-ended contour and highlight stick. This is the Insta Duo Contour Stick. I got the shade medium. There were 3, light, medium, deep, and the medium seemed like the best match for me. Like so many of these, on one end you have the contour as a matte contour shade, and then the other end you have a shimmery highlight shade. Now this format is nothing new. I have tried some that I really like, some that I don't like so much. The key for me here is blendability of the formula, especially when you have something like a foundation that dries to a powder finish. Going in over top with a cream could be disastrous if the formula is too creamy or waxy and just displaces the makeup underneath when you go to apply and blend. So the great thing about this is the formula is good in that it applies, it's like a very lightweight texture, and it plays really nicely with whatever you're wearing underneath, in that you go and apply it directly to the skin, and as you go and buff and blend it out, it doesn't displace the stuff underneath, whatever you're wearing. The contour on my skin tone is a very natural looking bronzy. Like, I don't even know that I would call that a contour. It's a very soft, subtle bronze. If I were to go full on contour, I might even step it up to the deep shade, which then tells me that this collection is lacking in shade range. Obviously, you can't get it all in with just 3 shades. So that much should have been apparent from the beginning, but just to confirm, medium, not deep enough if I want a true contour. But I do like the subtle bronzing that it gives. If I just kind of run it in my cheekbones, my temples, and around the perimeter of my face, and I go and buff and blend that in, it does give a really nice, subtle bronzy finish to the skin. And then the same could be said for the highlight. This is a very subtle highlight. In fact, you know me, I love a good blinding highlight. It could be a little bit more. I would like a little bit more bling from my stick, but if you like a more subtle highlight, this is a good one to reach for. I just apply that right here at the tops of the cheekbones, and it's like, I mean, you can see it here, it's really more of a satin kind of finish, a dewy satin finish, as opposed to a high shine bam. So if that's you, and I know a lot of you guys, whenever I rave about my favorite highlights, you're like, yeah, no ma'am, that's not what I like. This might be for you. This is a really nice highlighter. If you're looking for one in a stick format, this is a nice one to have. The next thing I got is kind of a random brow pick. They launched brow pomades in a stick formula. It's called Brow This Way Brow Pomade Fix and Fill. Mine is in the shade 003 Dark, which, again, not really that dark. I wouldn't say I'm a dark brunette. I would say I'm like a mid-tone, even without, if you hid the highlights that are not mine. I would not say I have dark brown hair. So this, again, is a shade range that is probably lacking. As far as pomades, or really even brow products go, this is not a waxy formula. Personally, in a brow pencil, one thing I like in my formula is for it to be a stiffer, waxier hold. That way, it not only fills in your brows, but it also holds them in place throughout the day without the need for an additional brow gel to kind of set them, so you can just forget them and you don't have to worry about your brows going every which way depending on what happens in your day. You know what I'm saying? So this is not a very waxy formula. As a result, I find that it is good at filling your brows in, not in a precise way. It's definitely one of those where you just want to add some overall volume, not necessarily definition of individual brows hair. Overall volume, you don't really care about adding the individual, like the distinction of individual brow hairs in there. That's what this is going to be good for. But if you really want to make sure your brows stay in the shape that you have put them in all day, I would recommend pairing with a separate gel, whatever that is that you like to use. You need that because this is not one that's going to keep them in place. Next up is a new Magnifies eyeshadow palette. This is the Spice edition, and I mean, I don't know if you're having deja vu, but it looks pretty identical to the Urban Decay Naked Heat palette. I mean, I'll show you close-up comparisons here, but it was like there was no hiding the fact that this outright dupes the Naked Heat palette. Basically shade for shade in the order they're included in the Heat palette. What I really like the Magnifies eyeshadow formula, and so this palette is no different. All of these are super buttery. They're very smooth. As a result, they can kick up quite a bit of fallout, which if you don't mind working with, shouldn't be a big thing. Some of the shades lack pigmentation even though they are very soft, so you definitely have to wear a primer. Like today I'm not wearing a primer and I feel like the colors kind of got muddied together, but then again I feel like a lot of other people would wear a primer regardless, so they would never experience that. So as long as you wear a primer, I think you can really maximize the pigment of these and you'll get that strong color payoff that you see in the pan. Just know if you don't, you might experience some muddying together and a little bit of a lack of intensity. While there are some subtle differences to the shades, definitely nuances into whether some of the multifaceted colors pull one color versus the other. You know, some of the finishes, especially with Urban Decay, might be a little bit more glittery than the Rimmel. Those are the reasons why I wouldn't say this is an exact dupe, but to the extent that you've had your eye on the Naked Heat palette because this color palette just calls your name, I mean, yeah, you should probably save a few bucks and just go in for this guy, because ultimately, like at the end of the day, they're gonna do the same thing for you in terms of a color palette. Unless you really want that extra glitz, unless, you know, one of these shadows speaks to you more than any of those in the Rimmel palette, then maybe consider the Urban Decay Naked Heat. But I would find it really hard to recommend the Heat over Rimmel if all you're really after is just that general color palette. Next, they also have new eyeliners, and these I'm actually pretty excited about. They're called Wonder Ombre Holographic Effect Eyeliners. I have the shade 01 Supernova Sky, which is a deep navy, a shimmery, well, almost a metallic. You can't really see individual shimmers. It's more like a deep satiny metallic navy. And then on the other end, you have this white shadow that has like a purple, an iridescent purpley pink transformation to it. The premise behind these is that you can use the deeper shadow first and then use the iridescent shade over top to kind of transform it or create an ombre, like a really easy, not natural looking, a really easy ombre effect between the two shades. Or honestly, you could just use the iridescent shade to, you know, whether it's do individual eyeliner or highlight the inner corner. I find that that has a lot of use alone as well. That said, we should get one thing straight. These are not holographic. For all of those who are very strict to the definition of holographic, that's not what this is. It's more iridescent, but I do think it's such a cool concept. You get a little bit more versatility. They've really taken a product that was simple, you know, a single liner, and they've tweaked a little bit to give you a lot more versatility in the looks you can create with it. And so I think there are 5 or 6 shades in this collection, and I'm strongly thinking of picking up more because I love the way that the bold shade wears in here. Like, it is a firmer, drier formula, so it does take a little bit of back and forth to really get it at the intensity that I want it at. It's not quite like a gel pencil formula that's not like a Milani. They have a very creamy gel pencil formula. It's a little bit drier and firmer than that, but once you work with it a little bit, the payoff is beautiful, and then you get that transformative shade on the other side too. So I thought this is a really cool concept and would totally recommend you checking it out if that's something you're interested in. And the last new product I have to talk about from Rimmel are their Lip Art Metallics. Basically, they are liquid lips with a metallic finish. I got the shade Ritzy Rose because apparently I can't own enough rose gold metallic lip products. It's what I'm wearing today. But I got it because I wanted to compare it to one of my favorite high-end formulas that looked very similar. It's the Smashbox Be Legendary Liquid Metal. This is the shade Mauve Squad, and I also recently brought this up because CYO Cosmetics has a metallic liquid lipstick in the shade Plead the Fifth that's also very similar. So as I kind of expected, this performs almost identically to the Smashbox. It says liquid lipstick, but don't think about this in a traditional sort of dry down matte transfer proof liquid lipstick sort of a thing. It's almost like a lipstick gloss hybrid where it has the texture and the application feel of a gloss, but it has the intense pigmentation of a lipstick. Like, it's totally opaque, you can't see through it. It really gives your lips a punch of pigment, and in this case a metallic finish, but it feels and has the comfort factor of a gloss. It also has the wear time of a gloss too, so don't expect these guys to last long. Anywho, in terms of how they compare to the Smashbox, I would say that even between the CYO, the Rimmel, and the Smashbox, the Rimmel comes the closest to matching not only the formula, but the shade of Mauve Squads from Smashbox. So to the extent that you have been dying to pick this up or you need to replace your Mauve Squad, I know that I will probably stick with the Rimmel if they continue to produce these and they're not limited edition, rather than repurchasing the Smashbox, because they're basically the same thing. And if you've been wanting to get in on the metallic lip trend but you haven't wanted to put up the cost for a Smashbox product, a Rimmel is probably more affordable. Plus, if you've been wanting to dive into the metallic lip trend but you don't want to pay Smashbox prices to do it because it's not like it's going to be an everyday thing for you, definitely go for the Rimmel instead because you get the same look, the same experience, but at a lower cost. So those are my thoughts on the new things from Rimmel. Overall, nothing bad, really nothing terrible about these products that have come out. I do think, as I mentioned, there are some things that I personally will use more long-term than others, like the concealer. Definitely love that. I love the Ombre pencil, and then once my Smashbox either expires or I use it all, I will probably continue reaching for the lip art. And then I will probably throw this Insta Fixin' matte into my daily routine as needed, as I just need to set my under eye area depending on the concealer that I'm using. The rest of it's great. I think the only thing that was not my favorite, is not the worst, but it's not my favorite, is the Brow This Way pencil, just because there's so many other products that I like using over this. But beyond that, it's really just a matter of preference, whether you think these products are for you or not. So I really hope this video helped. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, guys, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!